Okay, good morning again. This is our first session on step 4, and we're going to begin the way we often do by reading what the book says about step 4, and um, and then we'll see where we go. Um, so I'm reading from the very bottom of page 63, where we said the third step prayer, and we've done this with a take this spiritual step with an understanding person. And then it says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us from God. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Okay. Um, uh, so there was a fellow member of AA. His name was Joe Hawk. He had been sponsored by Don Pritz in Denver, Colorado, and then he moved to um, Santa Monica, and there he sponsored a man named Dan Sherman, who wrote this wonderful little book called Big Book Awakening, and um, and a lot of the study guide came out of this Big Book Awakening, which was a detailed way to get you, the sponsee, to mark up your book the way they were trained to do, the way they trained each other to do. And it was really, it's really quite a little book. Um, so why am I telling you that? We will refer today to several. Oh, I know what it was. Several worksheets that come out of that book, particularly the one on resentment, because it's just a wonderful way to get into the nuts and bolts of a resentful mind and what's going on there. But he would ask the question, how do you know when you've done enough work on step 3? He started this by, how do you know when you've done enough work on step 8? And his answer was, you start hearing unusual sounds like or a busy signal on a phone, because his point of view was, you'll know when you've done enough work when you're entering into the action that the step is requiring. So his answer to how do you know when you've done enough work on step 3 is you find yourself with a pencil and paper and you're starting to do the writing. And it's just a great answer, because that's what this is saying. It's saying you're not going to get anywhere treating your disease if you don't learn how to handle your resentment, your anger, your fear, and your sense of remorse around your conduct. But most of us, it's such a challenging thing to enter into that we won't do it. And so I just think it's a good answer. I personally, I did the third step on my knees with my sponsor, was George at the time, and then I proceeded to balk for a year and a half. He would come to visit and he'd ask me, "Well, you got your resentment list going?" And bear in mind, I'm a resentful guy. I mean, I got a lot of resentments. When I finally was ready to go, all I had to do was look through my phone directory and yep. But I was doing all this stuff to try to avoid, because I didn't want to look at it. And I would tell myself I'd done step 3 and I was balking at 4, but the truth was I hadn't really done. If you've really done 3, um, you're anxious and eager to get going on step 4. It's not going to be a motivational problem, but that's a hard thing to see. I sure didn't, and I what I really didn't see was, it wasn't so much resentment. I didn't want to get to 9. I didn't want to get to 8 and 9. I did not want to make an amend to my ex-wife the mother of my children. I just didn't, period. And so my clever little brain said, here's a good idea, just don't even get going on this resentment list. And that way we can stay away from ever having to make an amend to. And that's why I'm just a textbook case. I didn't do this stuff. I was not seeking a relationship with God. Um, I did this stuff because I heard you say that if I didn't change, I would drink again. And I just plain didn't want to drink again. That was my sole motivation at this point. And I don't think I'm unusual. I think a lot of us are, that we don't even really understand what the problem is. I didn't, I feel like today I'm coming up on the end of 14 years in here, and I feel like I'm just beginning to understand it. And this is after a lot of work with I've had 3 different sponsors, a lot of work. And I've tried to be helpful to a lot of other people. And particularly when you get to resentment, because one of the things I'm going to try to say today is resentment is an act of contempt prior to investigation. That we called this thing to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. We stop with that. It's a line. I don't think I've read it yet, but it's a line right in there. To conclude that others were wrong, that's as far as we get. And we sit on our anger and our negative feeling, and that's the end of it. And if you read, I just want to read what they say. This misquote of Herbert Spencer, doesn't matter. Um, there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof positive against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. And I'm saying to you, when I resent somebody, I am I'm experiencing contempt for them, you know, um, and I am unwilling to take a deep, hard look at it. And later on, as we get into this more, um, I'm going to make the case, which at least I know is true for me, that my resentment is really about fear. But the challenge is when you are angry, you don't see the fear. What you see is all the reasons why you're right and the other person is wrong. At least that's the way I do it. I'm making the case that I'm right, you're wrong, and how we're going to change the world to be a better place is I'm going to hate on you and wish you ill will, and you're not going to want that. So you're going to look at your behavior and you're going to change your mind about how you're going to live, and you're going to change, and then I'm going to be happier, you're going to be a better person, and the world will be a better place. Hoorah for resentment. Make the world a better place by resenting the hell out of anybody that's not behaving the way you think they ought to behave. So it was a big deal for me when we get into the 4th column and we're asking those questions. Where am I selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, or afraid? And I'm having to look at my behavior. And more than that, I think I'm jumping way ahead, but when I first did this with my sponsor, my answer in column 3 was all of the above. Pride, ambition, self-esteem, personal security, relationships, including sex, pocketbook. It was just chick, all of the above. And I've since then been taught to get into that more fully, and that's what one of these worksheets will do, to really to add the question how with a question mark. How does this affect my pride, my self-esteem, my ambitions? How? Because that's what gets me into the fear. And you all know that the primary responses to fear are fight, flight, or disappear. And I think in our case, what that turns out to be is fighting is resentment. That's where I'm entering into retaliation and argument with you about your behavior and how it affects me. Um, Flight means I get alone. Flight is to isolation. Flight is to um, somehow get safe by getting some distance between me and you. And disappear for me means go inside, and that winds up being remorse, and that winds up me feeling bad about the person that I seem to be. And and I since I have another view for me personally, and that is I'm trying to beat God to the punch. You know, when I get into remorse and start beating on myself and condemning myself, I'm saying, hey God, you don't need to punish me. I'm doing a good enough job. Just move over and punish somebody else instead. I'm beating myself up pretty good here, like a preemptive strike. Anyway, so I just want to take a little this. Remember, this is wandering through the big book, so I don't have to go straight through this thing. Um, so in the study guide, in this part about resentment, there the last little ditty is called Frank Buchmann, The Reason We Are Here. Now, that's kind of a bold statement, but I'm going to tell you that uh, Bill Wilson was a genius, both a human and a spiritual genius, no question. But this stuff that we do, he did not create, he did not make up. This stuff came from particularly Frank Buchmann and the Oxford groups and Sam Shoemaker. So I'm just going to read you this thing. If you want to find it, it's in the study guide. It's step 4, part 1, resentment, page 14, the last page of the resentment part. Frank Buchmann, born in 1878, died in 1961, was a Lutheran minister in Pennsylvania who moved to Oxford, England as a geographical cure for the intense resentment he felt for his former employers, a board of a small YMCA type enterprise. So he's in England, and he has the spiritual experience where he sees he's in a small group of people in a chapel, and he's witnessing a woman talk about her spiritual connection with God or whatever you want to call it. And he sees that his intense resentment for this board of this nonprofit that he was working for is blocking him from God, blocking him. And so he did some meditation. He eventually wound up writing letters of amends to these people, and went on to start these Oxford groups. So through prayer and faith with works, he was able to overcome this resentment and write a letter of amends to each of the parties involved. He meets Sam Shoemaker. Sam Shoemaker is a Princeton graduate, an Episcopal priest. He meets Shoemaker in China in 1918. Now that's um, 15 years before this is all going on in New York City. Um, then Buchmann later goes on to form the Oxford groups in the late 1920s. And bear in mind that both Bill and Bob are in Oxford groups. That's where this whole thing happened before, and they didn't become AA till after the book was published. And they split from the Oxford groups, and they named the fellowship after the book, not the other way around. So the Oxford group had a 6-step process that included self-examination, self-disclosure, restitution, and working with others. Both Bill and Bob were members of Oxford groups. From Frank Buchmann, AA gets our emphasis on and techniques for removing resentment, fear, and guilt, and other spiritual maladies that block our access to spiritual power. He moves spiritual work. This is a quote of somebody else about him. He moves spiritual work from the stained glass of a church to the home and work He championed the helping of others as a major transformational activity. All this stuff that we do is coming from Buchmann. Buchmann, and my point of that is because I'm about to read, resentment is the number one offender. That's how critical this thing is. And worse than that, I'm going to make the case that I'll say, speak for me, not you, but I really only have two alternatives. Um, the book says going on to the bitter end, trying to blot out of our consciousness how miserable we are. We read it this morning. And the other to accept spiritual help. Well, I'm going to tell you, my two options are resentment or gratitude. That's it. I'm either in resentment or I'm feeling grateful for my life. When I'm annoyed with my life, either whether it's you or the traffic or the healthcare system or the judge court system, whatever it is, my two choices are being grateful or being annoyed. And for me, annoyed is a mild form of, or mild or intense form of resentment. Okay, so let's see. Still reading from this. Buchmann's right-hand man in America was an Episcopal minister in New York City named Sam Shoemaker. It is from Sam Shoemaker that we get our meeting formats and techniques. It was Sam Shoemaker that got Roland Hazard sober, who got Ebby sober, who got Bill sober. So if these guys were not around, we're not even meeting on Zoom today. That's how, and I don't know what, I'm not sure what my point is. um, and it's not to deflect any attention or admiration from Bill Wilson. It's just to say, it's just to try to emphasize that resentment will kill you. The hard part is, and I've said this before, I'll probably say it, there is a attraction to resentment, at least for me, because when I am resenting you, I do not experience self-doubt. I know I'm right because I make it my business to be right. I know you're wrong, and this is my strategy for handling your wrongness, is sending you a bunch of ill will so you'll change your behavior. Later on, we're going to call it the 3 lies of resentment. Line number 1, I am unhappy and it's not my fault, it's your fault. That's what my mind tells me. You are the reason I am miserable. Line number 2 is, here's a really good strategy to make you into a better person and make the world a better place. I'm going to hate on you till you finally question, why is Jack hating me? And then you're going to look at your behavior. It'll be obvious to you why I hate you, and you'll change. And then you'll be better, I'll be better, and the world will be a better place. All because of the positive power of resentment. Now that's insanity. That's what we call drinking poison, hoping the other person's going to die. So the third lie is the one that's the hardest, and the third lie is the one that if we do this thing right, we find in that fourth column of the resentment inventory. And that lie is, I could never behave the way you're behaving. I could never do to another human being what you're doing to me. In fact, that's what gives me the right to resent you. That I couldn't be that person. And usually with any examination at all, you'll say the reason it bothers you is because you do treat other people that maybe it may be different in some kind of way, but you'll do that. So I'm jumping way ahead, but and let me just finish this. So okay. And then you hear this every once in a while, and Joe and Charlie were the first guys, I think, to say this. But the miracle that AA is, people talk about seconds and inches. So there's a moment in our book, and we read it earlier. A while back, but when Roland Hazard goes to see Carl Jung to try to get sober. And Carl Jung, probably the finest psychotherapist on the planet, works with him for a long period of time. It could have been 6 months. I don't think it was as long as a year. And Roland Hazard leaves there. It's page 26, I think. Um, Leaves there feeling pretty good about himself, and he drinks. He either drinks at the airport or on the cruise ship or something. He drinks right away, goes back to Jung and says, "What's the deal here?" And Jung says these terrifying words to him: "I have never seen an alcoholic with a mind like yours recover." Can you imagine if you just spent a year with the guy and he says that to you? I mean, wouldn't you be like, well, why did you take my money and spend all this time with me if you've never seen an alcoholic with a mind like mine recover? I mean, it's like, you know, any rate, if he hadn't said that, and if Roland Hazard hadn't gone back to New York City and gone to Sam Shoemaker's Oxford groups at Calvary Church in New York City, we're not even here, because Roland wouldn't have gotten sober. Roland wouldn't have gotten Ebby sober, and Ebby wouldn't have gone to Bill Wilson. So it's really a remarkable chain of events that did this. And I hope I haven't said this 3 or 4 times already, because so at any rate, and then what Joe and Charlie say is, you got to remember, Carl Jung has no idea about these Oxford groups. You know, what Carl Jung says is, you're going to need a spiritual experience. You're not going to get over this just by going to church. That's not going to cut it. It's like, you're not going to get sober just by going to AA. There's some other stuff that we've got to do in here if we really want better lives, or if we really want to humbly rely on God. So, let's see, don't lose my train of thought. I just did. Anyway, oh yeah. Jung had no idea about the Oxford groups, and he also had no idea that Silkworth at the same time was coming up with this theory. You're not just mentally screwed up, you guys are physically different than other people. You can't drink safely. And the only treatment we had, this is a combination of a mental problem and a physical problem. The mental problem gets you to seek relief through alcohol. But the physical problem is, once you've made that insane mistake of taking that first drink, you're gone. You're a goner, because you're going to have to drink more. If you're a real alcoholic, you have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. You don't stop. You keep going till you run out, pass out, or blackout. So I find that remarkable, and it's also a good way to understand the nature of the disease, just by imagining that moment. Okay, just to finish this up, Buchmann and the Oxford groups became so controversial that Bill Wilson could not give Buchmann the credit he deserved. He just couldn't. Well, but of Shoemaker, in AA Comes of Age, page 261, Bill said, "It is through Sam Shoemaker that most of AA's spiritual principles have come. He has been the connecting link. It is what Ebby learned from Sam and then told me that makes this connection." So if Buchmann hadn't trained Shoemaker, and Shoemaker hadn't saved Ebby, who saved Bill, who met Dr. Bob through the Oxford groups, we're not even here having this conversation today. Okay, so back to the beginning of this, resentment is a major problem for most of us. If you've worked with a number of people, I'm sure you've seen, for some of us, resentment is the biggest. For some of us, it's fear. It's not resentment, it's fear. And for some of us, it's shame. It's sense of remorse. It's a sense of being wrong, however you characterize it. It's not always, not everybody is, resentment is the biggest thing, but for many of us it is. And what I'm trying to say again, the important thing for me to understand is, I only get two choices. It's resentment, or it's doing what I got to do to get over resentment, which for me winds up being, I have to find the fear. If I can find the fear, I can pray for its removal, and I can make amends for its harmful results of me acting on my anger as a result of my fear. Then I got a shot at serenity. Then I got a shot of feeling good about my life and feeling grateful for my life. That's how important this stuff is. Our liquor was but a symptom. We had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, I'm back on page 64. We started on a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of a business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. I tell you, I've been reading this book for so long now, and I have read it with other people, and I don't know if we've talked about a wonderful way to read with somebody is you read a sentence, then I read a sentence, then you read a sentence, and if you do it in a group, you're going around, each person's reading a sentence, and you just hear it differently. Just reading this today, it's like, wow, I didn't see the depth of that. The last sentence, he cannot fool himself about values. Have you heard somebody say, you call them character defects, I call them coping skills, survival skills? I think these are good things. They've kept me here. You're talking about them negatively, but we value them because we think we're here because of them. I think I'm here because I'm a smart guy. And it's taken years in here to discover just how dumb I am. And that the ultimate character defect for me is self-justification, trying to justify my thinking, thinking my thinking, because I can't ask God to direct my thinking. And then trying to prove it's good thinking, when how it works is some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas and the results were nil till we let go absolutely. It's so much harder for me because I'm not only not willing to let them go, I'm trying to prove they're right, that they're good, that I can think my way through this life, which is what keeps me from humbly relying on God and trying to be the person God wants me to do. Which means I may say the third step prayer 2 or 3 times a day, but I'm not really living it. But I am practicing. And that's very important. Every time I get on myself for not, and how often I say to people, I think it's a character defect. I'm not sure. I can see stuff. I can tell you what to do. And I'm not usually wrong. But if you throw it back at me, you doing this, Jack? You know, um, how often and I believe the first rule of sponsorship is you cannot suggest anything to another if you ain't doing it yourself. And I always find that line that's on page 164 that you cannot transmit something you haven't got. Oh, ouch. Here I am trying to transmit something, and you can't do it is what it's saying. You can't teach what you haven't learned. And I'm pretty damn good at seeing what I want to learn. It's harder for me to really do it. And the saving grace is step 12 doesn't say accomplish these principles in all your affairs. It doesn't. It says practice. It says what's important, how it works, says it to be willing to grow along spiritual lines, which really means to be willing to pray for willingness to grow along spiritual lines. And I just want to throw out, because it's coming into my mind, I mentioned the name of Don Pritz, and this guy in Denver, Colorado, that he's responsible for so many things. The Northeast Fellowship of the Spirit that takes place in Portland, Maine, is a result of Don Pritz, just as an example. And he's the one that is given credit for the set-aside prayer. And the beauty of the set-aside prayer is its gentleness. Um, the third step prayer says, relieve me of the bondage of self so I can better do thy will, and the fear prayer says, remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be, and the set aside prayer says, please set aside everything I think I know about me, about you, about the big book, about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, about the 12 steps of recovery. Please set aside, just put it over here so I can have an open mind and a new experience of you. Wow. That's a gentle prayer. And we'll talk about where it comes from, where it shows up in the book. Because it never says it specifically, but it's just a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful, I believe fervently that our prayer for removal is our secret ingredient that I haven't found in any other spiritual tradition. Now, everybody else is saying, be this way. Um, ours say, relieve me of the bondage of self, take away my obsession with me. And I like to add with my human experience, because I believe it's my obsession with my human experience that keeps me from my spiritual experience, which is my relationship with my soul. I feel I've lived my 77 years almost 100% for the body and the mind, where I should be living for the sake of my soul. That's my body and my mind are going to stop. I believe my soul is not. And so why am I investing all this time and money and energy and concern in my human experience when it's going to stop? I imagine within the next 20 years. I like to tell myself I'm going to live to be 97, but I don't know. When it comes, it seems to come fast, looking at my friends. um, at any rate. Okay. So when in doubt, go back to the reading. That's what I find. That's why it's nice to have reading to do, so get me back on track. So we start on this personal inventory. This is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It's a huge sentence. It's saying this is about two things. When you get to step 10, it says that we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is the opposite of faith without works is dead. Faith without works is saying understanding without effective behavior doesn't mean anything. It's just mental fluff. Why we read, head in the clouds, feet on the ground. Our head in the clouds with God, our feet are on the ground in this world, trying to meet the calamity with serenity. And its mental understanding is not enough. So in this instance, they're saying first, you got to find out the facts. You got to find out the facts about your resentful feelings, your frightened feelings, your remorseful, shameful feelings, and then you got to do something about it. That's the action part. Fact finding is mental. Fact facing is a process, a behavioral process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. This means, do I value my resentment more than a feeling of gratitude? And I can tell you for me, I am so grateful that I can feel grateful. I don't feel it all the time, for sure. But I know when I'm going to have a good day when I wake up just glad to be here. Just instead of, oh, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do? What am I going to do when this person says that? Or whatever situation I'm anticipating. It's a whole different thing than feeling grateful. And I'm trying to add to this because this is not in my nature. Um, I'm into this Jesuit stuff, and Saint Ignatius said, "Your primary purpose is to trust, love, and serve your Creator, and thereby do the work that your soul came here to do." And it doesn't matter if you have a rich life or a poor life, a healthy life or a sick life, a long life or a short life, an honored life or a dishonored life. You know, that ain't what matters. What matters is that you trust, love, and serve your Creator. So I'm trying to get where I feel um, grateful for the opportunity to serve my Creator. And I can do that anywhere, anytime, if I'll ask the 10th step question. The 10th step question: how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts which must, M-U-S-T, not a suggestion, must go with us constantly. This is the proper use of the human will. Oh, are you freaking kidding me? That's what I'm supposed to be doing, wandering around all day long going, God, how can I best serve you? How can I best serve you? Of course I can't. But I will tell you, if you can take your mind to that, especially when you get in trouble, when something's happening you don't like, or you're feeling crummy, or somebody says something really insulting or annoying, ask the question, God, how can I, in this situation right here, right now, what do you want me to do? How can I best serve you? And why I love another one of the readings we do today, show me the way of patience and tolerance and kindness and love. And I heard a man, AA presenter, Big Book Workshop, Bob Olson, also from Denver, also sponsored by this guy, Don Pritz. He said, here's an idea. Tomorrow, just be as selfish as you can all day long. Think only of yourself. Do only things for yourself. Don't do anything for anybody else. And don't say, above all, don't say thank you. And then he said the next day, and then at the end of the day, write down how you feel. Then the next day, do the opposite. Try not to think of yourself at all. Try to be helpful to everybody around you, whatever, and see how you feel at the end of the day. And his point was, this is how you learn to value your feelings, and hopefully, I mean, I feel so much better. I mean, I told you, I find resentment attractive because it overcomes self-doubt. Because when I'm angry, I am not in doubt about who I am or what I am trying to do. And that's always been a huge problem for me. Why am I here and what am I supposed to do? Okay, at any rate, one object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, get rid of them promptly without regret. We cannot fool ourselves about values. And this applies to fear, and this applies to remorse as well. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure, being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. So in this case, at the start, the common manifestations are our resentments and our fears and our sense of remorse. That's how they are manifesting. But we're going to get deeper into it. And we're further going to break down these manifestations of self. Joyce, I think you just unmuted. No, I want to mute you. Whoops. Just do this. Okay. Um, okay. So let's see. What was I trying to say? Oh, we're going to get into these other manifestations of pride, self-esteem, ambitions, a sense of security, personal relationships, including sex, and finally pocketbook. Okay, I'm going to read this next paragraph, and we're going to stop after that. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. You know, that's including alcohol. Ain't that quite a statement? Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. And when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. This is a powerful statement. You know, if I'm all concerned with my physical well-being and my mental well-being, it will actually divert my attention from my spiritual growth. And worth identifying what's helping me to grow spiritually and what's just diverting my attention to something else. And I think that's where we old people have a real advantage because we've been through this stuff before. You know, the fear page is going to say, the reason I fear is because my self-reliance fails me. Self-reliance is agnosticism. I self-rely because I don't feel any connection to God. When I ask the question, how can I best serve thee? I don't get anything. You know, that's when I don't have a relationship. And that's what I cannot transmit to another if I don't have it. If I don't have feel I have a relationship with God, how am I going to help you have a relationship with God? I think that's what it means. I don't know. Okay, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found, now these are the things that are going to show up in column 3. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. So that hurt or threatened, that means fear. You know, I'm one of those people that because I'm determined to think I'm right, I didn't think there was any fear. I thought my resentment was justified, and couldn't even look at it. So it's been revolutionary for me to discover that the cause of my resentment is fear, because I don't feel any fear. And it's the beauty and miracle of that fourth column when you get over there and start. And I do believe where this is where sponsors really earn our non-existent pay, um, because when you're sitting outside of another person's brain, you can ask a question like, all right, let's imagine that happens. Now, what are you afraid of? You know, it's so important to work fear because we'll say, well, I'm afraid that this is going to happen. Well, let's say that happens. What are you afraid of now? You know, and usually, usually if you keep working it down, it's, I'm going to die alone in pain. You know, um, and then if you ask, well, what's the matter with that? I mean, that seems like an absurd question, right? What's the matter with that? And the answer for me is I'm going to feel like my life was a waste. And I don't like feeling that. I don't like feeling it was a wasted opportunity. Um, but the importance is that what our book says is the cause of your fear is the failure of you relying on yourself because you've got no relationship with this power greater than your mind and your body. You can't access it. Okay, so we will start up there next week, and then we're going to take a couple weeks off for the holidays. I always appreciate your presence and your attention, and we're going to end this recording and have some open discussion. Thank you for being here. Whoops.